Okay, so I think everyone can see this, right? Okay. So hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, depending on which place of the planet you are. I have to give my congrats to Vlad and Wendy, who have been amazing hosts to such a multi-perspectival conference and have been keeping the show running smoothly despite some minor attempts to break out the balance. So it's been wonderful to be part of this conference, and I suspect that by now, with almost 24 hours of engaging in talks and workshops about creativity and serendipity, uncertainty is a concept that's not so far away. And what we propose is to continue along this path, an undefining but exciting path, exploring creative uncertainties and discussing how agency and fortuity can help defining new paths to complexity in contemporary education. And from a developmental viewpoint, agency and fortuity, as well as education and creativity, are key constructs that seem to be functioning as if they were two sides of the same coin. Because if we think how developmental trajectories are shaped, there are many fortuitous events and anticipated events that end up playing a decisive part in one's life. And focusing on education, for example, I'm sure many of us remember having at least one teacher with whom we came across unintentionally during our paths and ended up having a positive, hopefully positive mark in our learning processes. In some extraordinary cases, this fortuitous encounter might even have weaved new possibilities on how we experience and how we construct new worlds of meaning and actually end up becoming ourselves and other selves in this ever-changing world that we live in. So an unanticipated and happening by chance encounter can have a lasting effect, and in some cases even unfold new life trajectories, such as helping us find a hidden talent or even pursuing a career in a specific direction. Moreover, fortuitous events can also constitute rare opportunities for us to develop our creativity, because the creative experience interweaves with this ability to deal with and harness unexpected situations. But to seize fortuity as a creative possibility, a constellation of personal, interpersonal, contextual, and even material elements must be aligned. So the systemic complexity underlying the numerous interconnecting elements that are revolving around a fortuitous event highlights how human agency can play a role in transforming a trivial episode into a potentially life-changing one. Thus, having not only a solid but also a flexible sense of personal agency is critical. And in a world that is in the aftermath of a pandemic, this ability seems to have become more valuable than ever. Yet, paradoxically, in education, standardized methods and assessments still seem to prevail, leaving little room for chance and hazard in the classroom. Fortuity, which becomes often translated into uncertainty, tends to be envisioned as anxiogenic instead of recognized as vital for this process of diversifying meaning-making possibilities that underpins one's social, cognitive, and emotional development, and even creative development. But if something has become crystal clear with the coup of the COVID-19 is that uncertainty and fortuity are unavoidable in our lives. So it seems urgent to discuss and rethink how education might embed them in its context and practices. And no doubt this is a colossal task. And I am aware of it, but small steps have been garnering mankind giant leaps since we landed on the moon. So I think we should better give it a try and see if we actually succeed. And adding to other excellent ideas that were discussed during this day, our suggestion is to start by a conceptual shift, changing of perspective on how we see fortuity and uncertainty, to start seeing them as potential triggers for enhancing students' social, psychological, and emotional complexity. Ultimately, fortuity and uncertainty can magnify students' social perspective taking, self-efficacy, critical thinking, and even creativity, to name a few. And if on the one hand, creativity bears the potential to open new horizons to the meaning-making space of education, on the other, fortuity can impact creativity and the systemic interactions between individual self-organizing structures and the social cultural context. Thus, it seems vital for education to start effectively framing creativity in a complexity matrix that acknowledges the multiple individual, social, cultural, and material dimensions that must engage for it to manifest. And in this sense, we suggest intersecting fortuity, agency, creativity, and education by using a three-level curricular approach. And the focus on the curriculum ends up being an obvious one when discussing educational matters, because it is one of the pillars of the teaching learning process. And the truth is that these three levels that you can see here, the intended, the implemented, and the attained curriculum, they are inextricably linked to each other, because an intended curriculum, a set of formal documents where we observe a definition of creativity as a trainable soft skill, will most probably endorse instructive pedagogical practices as an implemented curriculum, ended up hindering students' possibilities for exercising their creativity and construct, for example, their creative self-efficacy. On the contrary, if we have an intended curriculum where teachers get to work collaboratively with students to make the classroom a space that is safe for mistakes, safe to engage with the unknown, eventually this will result in more complex levels of social psychological development. Then to articulate all of these dimensions of creativity, agency, fortuity, and the curriculum, it should be acknowledged the systemic complexity that there is at hand, and provide students and teachers the flexibility and time that they need to meaningfully engage in all three. So future curricula should dare to take a new outlook on fortuity, because it can add this element of chance, of the unknown, that heightens complexity and provides this flexible and eventually empowering opportunity to exercise one's sense of agency and develop creativity. And to embed these elements into the classroom, one possible direction, and I'd like to underscore a possible direction because there are many others, could be through aesthetics, because aesthetics operate within this intersubjectivity plateau where fortuity and uncertainty are essential for constructing a broader understanding of the plurality of worlds that we inhabit. Hence, providing a curriculum that's focused on cultivating this aesthetic education, where art and science are considered equally relevant for preparing students to overcome the challenges of contemporary societies, could be a viable route. Furthermore, it could also be significant to design more flexible curricula in which scientific and artistic disciplines could be tailored to suit the student's preferences, abilities, or needs. And aesthetic experience should also be diversified, meaning that the curricula should contemplate having more aesthetic experiences to offer to the students, because through these experiences, they can explore new perceptions of the world. However, to achieve higher levels of social psychological complexity, we should not only have access to experience, but also to think over it and reflect upon it. And therefore, in addition, a curricula should also provide the time and space for teachers and students to constructively explore and discuss these experiences in the classroom. So this kind of demands led us to think how it might be also important to rethink teachers' training, because from the experience that we have of discussing these issues with a lot of teachers, they manifest difficulties in exercising this role of facilitators, of moderators, that can actually provide in the classroom a climate that's open to the exploration of the possibilities that each problem or situation entails. And this is a significant aspect, because by having this kind of climate in the classroom, then educational settings can be truly meaningful learning spaces. And moving this discussion towards a closer focus on the attained curriculum, we would like to share with you just a few of the results that we had from a mixed method study we designed that was focused on exploring how education could interweave these dimensions into the curriculum. So we focused on assessing as measures of this attained curriculum, the creative self-efficacy of a sample of 393 Portuguese students that were aged 3 to 16 years old and enrolled in the preschool and basic cycle of education. And we complemented this by collecting a subsample from this largest sample that was actually used for us to have access to a proxy of their socio-cognitive complexity, in this particular case, their aesthetic judgment level. And just to share with you some of our results, a few of our results, it was very interesting to see that we obtained a significant effect of the level of schooling or education in their creative self-efficacy. So we got to observe this. And it was even more interesting to see when we approached the structure of the scale itself that was composed by 3 different factors, how non-linearity emerged as a feature of creative self-efficacy. And this was actually something that led us to think and probably assume that we could have here some grounds to see that deterministic lenses cannot embrace the full complexity of child and adolescent creativity development. And this was also the same pattern of results that we obtained when we were focused on the aesthetic judgment level, because as you can see here, there was a significant effect that was observed. But then when you get to see the graph, there is a peak on the second cycle of education. Our 5th and 6th graders ended up having higher levels of aesthetic judgment than the ones that were on the 3rd cycle. And this could seem some kind of unexpected event, but due to fortuity, we ended up seeing that our explanation could reside in the fact that without our previous intention or even knowledge, the schools where we collected this sample had the children on the 5th and the 6th grade enrolled in an arts curriculum plan. And in light of the arguments that we have discussed before, this led us to think that it could be plausible to think that they actually had access to pedagogical practices that were focused on promoting the aesthetic education that we were referring just a few minutes ago, and that these students' developmental possibilities effectively got widened and ultimately allowed them to achieve these higher levels of aesthetic judgment. Notwithstanding the exploratory nature and, of course, the cross-sectional essence of this study, which entails a series of limitations, these findings seem to add some credence to this relevance of acknowledging how nonlinearity permeates child and adolescent development. And from our point of view, this can also enlighten about the need to equate how decisive can be the role that fortuity can play in shaping this nonlinear and complex developmental pathways, particularly when we are focusing on the realm of creativity. So moving forward in contemporary education seems a very difficult task, but a very engaging one as well. And from where we stand, this will probably depend on the education system's capacity to define and implement curricular goals and pedagogical practices that are intentionally focused in endowing students with this ability to embrace a complex and pluralistic perspective of the world. And in times of impending political, social, economical, and cultural challenges like the ones we are living, and overall even human challenges, this might be critical for forging our individual and even collective futures. Thus, acknowledging fortuity and uncertainty as mechanisms for enhancing and complexifying this creative experience can be invaluable in the classroom. in custom contests, because they can diversify ways of world making, infusing developmental trajectories with creative possibilities. Thank you very much for your attention. I do hope to see a lot of hands raised with questions and commentaries, suggestions, but if we don't have the time to do this here, please feel free to contact me using any of these possibilities. Thank you very much. I hope I wasn't on full speed, which is something I usually do.
It was excellent, and just what we need, Andreia, for end of the day, to be honest. So a round of applause. Thank you so much. I love how you demonstrated the sea of hands that you would like to see coming. So Joe, do you have your hand up with the question?
Yes, I do. That was a great talk. I hope I can show my aesthetic judgment by also saying you had beautiful slides, which I took many screenshots of. So thank you for that. It occurred to me to ask about something a little bit interesting and weird, which you'll see why I'm inspired, was it's about the permeability of boundaries. And the reason it occurred to me to ask you about this, I've got a colleague in Porto who I'm talking to about aesthetics, but he's in the engineering faculty, so maybe you would never interact. So we're talking about ethics and aesthetics. You're talking about aesthetics and education. It happens to be routed through me. I live in Oxford, but this has happened before to me, where you have people who are sort of nearby, but they have these non-permeable institutional boundaries, and then you go outside and you find these shorter connections by way of Oxford. It happened to me. I was talking to two people inside of a nonprofit in California, and the boss in the nonprofit didn't know the history of the guy who worked for him. And I said, oh yeah, he works on this really interesting stuff. So bringing it back to the content of your talk though, about education, is I think we are pretty clearly living in a world in which traditional boundaries and traditional structures are massively permeated. You go to a village, people will have smartphones. You go to a city, people will have, I don't know, whatever they have in the city, computers and stuff. So people are very interconnected. And I wonder, when you're talking about curricula and stuff like that, and you talked about the national curriculum in Portugal, each country will have its national curriculum. But I wonder if there isn't a kind of response to the issues you're talking about with aesthetics that would have like an aesthetics of permeability of boundaries, or an aesthetics of, because these things create serendipitous discoveries, like when the boss learns, oh, his employee has all this other stuff, or I tell you, oh, your other colleague you've never met is doing interesting related things. Is there a way to teach people about this kind of permeability, and does that relate to your issues of chance and stuff?
Well, that's a really interesting and challenging question, because it's a very complex task that you are exploring. I think that this permeability of boundaries is pivotal actually in education, because schools cannot be closed. Schools have to be open and let themselves permeate by society, by communities, by parents, by all these educational agents that are outside the physical boundaries of the school. And I think that probably the best way to teach people to do this, it's to start making this kind of experiences and this kind of interchangeable communication and dialogues happening early on. Because if you have small children in kindergarten who are used to do this kind of processes, and you let them accompany this through the level of schooling, through the school years, probably it becomes some natural thing that they can do, and they are more at ease with discussing this kind of questions, because this aesthetic dimension, it's something that it's far from being new in education. We can go back in time and see how relevant this was, but probably in time it got lost a little bit, the message, and even the fact that it's so many times confused aesthetics only with the arts. It's something that hasn't helped to break all these myths about what aesthetic education really is. So I think that what you are talking about makes perfect sense, and we could probably be using it and doing it from early on. I think that children are the future, so we can be constructing this from their early ages.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We are on perfect time. Sadly, the sea of hands has to be put down. I'm very sorry, Andreia, but if people, can contact you with more questions, absolutely. And I'm sure we're going to meet at future events. And I really appreciate you presenting and sharing with us. Thank you.